In this seventh episode of our series, we are going to talk about a particularly useful strategy for EAL learners called barrier games. It is very useful for developing both listening and speaking skills. It is about exchanging information about a topic between two students. In a situation where one of the learners possesses information that the other one doesn't. I explain what the activity and the process of devising it might look like using examples from geography, art, and maths, but it should be very easy for any teacher to use this strategy in any subject that they themselves teach. There are different varieties of barrier games. In this tutorial, we are focusing on two types. Type A, where learner A has a diagram, a schematic or a map of some sort with information, but learner B has just a blank copy of the same onto which information provided orally by learner A has to be transferred. You can see a quick example from a geography lesson on water cycle here. Learner A has the information on the different stages and terminology associated with the process, but learner B clearly doesn't. It is up to learner A to relay this information by speaking in such a way that is comprehensible to B, so that the information can be recorded accurately by B. The other type of barrier games, type B here, is one where learner A has some information that B doesn't, but B has some other information that A doesn't. You can see this in the example here. This is one of the resources available at the EAL Nexus website. We see, for instance, that A has the definition for a nucleus, but not the actual name of it, but B does have the name, but not the definition. Let's have a look at how devising a type A activity could look like in a geography lesson. This activity is based on a material freely available from Toot Hill School at address provided at the bottom of the screen. Learner A has all the information, but I've changed the other map so that learner B has just the roads, rivers, and basic features on the map. Legend is available to both learners. The learners also have additional terms and symbols available to them, as you can see on the right here under the Tourist Information heading. As this lesson is about map reading, they've also been provided with a compass and geographical directions. This is unchanged from the original resource. In order to complete this task, information provided by learner A has to be very specific. For example, learner A would have to say there is a picnic site in the southern part of square 0742 to describe the item's precise location. Therefore, aside from reading square numbers from the map itself, our learners need the names of the items to be recorded on the map and compass directions, all of which are already available within the resource. But they will also need to use grammatical structures such as there is a "n" and there are, as well as in the western, southwestern, northern, of. Certainly, where EAL learners are involved, just telling them to exchange this information is just not going to happen. You need to structure the language for them. We can use substitution tables for talking for this purpose. Here, for each item, they would generate two sentences. One, as you can see, about the location of a particular item to be recorded, the number of a square, and the following one about where within that square it is located. It's natural to use our compass directions for this. Of course, the same directions could later be used to talk about the geographical relation of one item to another. For instance, the wood is north of the picnic site. But here, we are focusing on recording individual map elements only. Substitution tables can certainly be used for writing, but here we really mean to use them for speaking purposes. Language learning relies on repeating structures and lexes. I'm certain it is very apparent to you that the structure there is and there are and others in these tables will be repeated and rehearsed a number of times in this process. You will have also noticed that the articles or their lack are made to look more important here as they are in larger font and in red font. That's the actual linguistic objective of this task. I want to see if the learners understand that in order to use a or an, you need to be dealing with a singular noun. If you look closely, no other option beside a is actually possible using this table. There's no word beginning with a vowel in the third column of the first table, and none of the words is plural, so using there are is also impossible. We know that, but we are not going to tell our students this at first, as that is precisely what we want to check. In the second table, we want to drive our learners' understanding that now we can change the indefinite a noun, such as a church, to the definite the church, since we are now dealing with the specific church. Many Eastern European languages do not use such articles at all, so it is imperative to teach them. What better way to do so than in the context of your mainstream subject? Now, barrier game type B has learner A possessing certain information that B doesn't, and vice versa. Here we've got an example from the subject of arts, where we look at different artistic painting styles. This, of course, would be done once a few lessons on the topic were delivered. We can see how information is missing from table A. For instance, the name realism and surrealism, but it's available in B. It is very important that the headings here are actual questions, so that the students can repeatedly ask them of each other. If, instead of the question, what period does this style cover, you would just write period or time, your EAL learners would be stuck, unable to ask that question. You might want to teach the students, before this activity commences, how to answer the questions using fuller sentences, at least with subjects and verbs, so that they can see how subject and verb in the question can be used as a starter for an answer. So the question, who are the representative artists for this style, could be answered with the representative artists for this style are, and then giving the names of those artists. Following the completion of the previous task, you might want to think about how your learners might produce some writing. This is post-barrier game, but it is crucial to think how to get your learners not just to get the knowledge, but develop their English language writing skills whilst using this newly found knowledge. At this point, your learners might be able to write short sentences about the grid they had just completed, but these would be short sentences and likely grammatically and linguistically uninspiring. We can extend that. Look at the example sentence and the graph based on the information about idealism from the grid. In essence, we can teach our learners how to turn these four sentences, 1a plus 1b plus 2 plus 3, into one complex sentence. Idealism, which is 1a, covered the 1400s to 1700s, which is 1b, can be easily split by represented by, which is number 3, and then linked to depicted its subject S, which is number 2, with the connective end. Indeed, all the other styles in the grid can be described using this type of approach. This is, of course, teaching academic language, having high expectations of our learners, and not shying away from challenging them. All it takes is modeling it to your learners first, and then getting them to do some independent work. I also don't think that your other native English-speaking learners will suffer for it. Another option for producing sentences, although likely not as complex as those on the previous screen, is using graphic organizers. Here, we've got our 5 different artistic styles. Each has 3 sub-branches and boxes, and these relate to the information from the grid: period in history, depiction of its subjects, and representative artists. This information can be transferred onto this graphic organizer from the grid. But how would our learners learn to say sentences or write sentences using this information? Well, If you think of verbs as connectives between subjects and objects, then writing one of the words and phrases or their synonyms on the actual branch lines would allow you to create sentences as you can see here. Idealism is represented by Hyacinth Rigaud and Raphael. You can then ask your learners if they can identify which verb is used for which question. The actual form of verbs we are dealing with here allows for some additional teaching. All of them take the ed suffix, but represented is not a verb, whilst the other two are. This might be confusing to EAL learners. It would be a good idea to address this and explain it. Of course, Type B barrier games can be used with just paragraphs of text or even smaller sentences. Here I've got a very simple and short example from the subject of maths. We can see a word problem here, the one about Sarah, who collects coins. As you can see, I have removed the word got for learner A and lost for learner B. They'd need to come together and ask questions such as what did she do or what happened to her to get the words. Only then will they be able to write the actual equation to solve the problem. They need each other to find the solution. You could, of course, remove different numbers from words problem tasks. If, for instance, you are dealing with learners very new to English who are still learning their numbers. Verbs in mathematical word problems are actually quite interesting. Often they are regular verbs that express mathematical operation. By regular, I just mean simple everyday words. Whilst, yes, as we can see on the left, typical words to use for plus and minus are to add or to subtract or to take away. How often did you think that to get or to receive actually means addition, but to spend will mean subtraction? To save money means having more money, but if something costs a sum, it means one has less money rather than more. Of course, it depends on the context of the sentence and the word problem itself. To sell, for instance, could mean both plus and minus. If the word problem asks about how many items were sold, clearly would be dealing with adding sales or profits from sales. However, if selling is about how many items less are in stock as a result of the sales, then you're dealing with a minus. Nonetheless, we can teach how mathematical operations can be expressed not only through vocabulary items typically associated with the subject of maths, but by regular words that are used to express the same meaning. These can easily become the focus of our barrier games in maths.